This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. It's episode 455 of the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm Jamie Bogner, and joining me today is one of the people I enjoy reading and watching the most out there on the internet, Doug Veliky. Welcome back to the podcast, Doug.
Thank you so much, Jamie. It's good to be back.
Doug, of course, runs the Beer Crunchers blog. You can find him on social media under his Beer Aficionado thing, makes great educational and entertaining videos, and is now a partner at Bright Bev. Was with Revolution before that, and is now out into this kind of this other sector, which you're going to tell us about over the course of this. One of the things I love most about what Doug does, every now and then he will put on his wizard hat of sorts and conjure up this character that he has called Prognostic Doug, who looks into the future. What?
Nostradamus.
Nostradamus. Yes. Nostradamus. I was
sorry to cut you off there.
You are correct. Nostradamus. Looking into the future, predicting what will happen, and so I think for this episode here in January, as we look at the year ahead of us, I think it'd be interesting to take that Nostradamus approach and see what Doug believes we have in store this year. Spoiler alert, I don't think any of it's going to take anyone by surprise. This is not a crucial revolutionary year where everything is going to change. I think this is probably what, Doug, an evolutionary year by most accounts.
Absolutely. Yeah. With the news cycle that we saw, especially toward the end of the year, I think this is where we're going to see a lot of breweries focusing in on what's working best for them and putting more eggs in those baskets rather than trying to, reinvent the wheel. Although there are a lot of new exciting categories that are blurring the lines between beer and others as well, that breweries are faced with a decision on, do they kind of go all in with what they're best known for and invest further behind that, or do they try to diversify and try to be more welcoming to more people, which comes with its own challenges?
Craft beer is nothing if it is not dynamic. I should say craft beverage as an entire category, because while we go from beer, we also have plenty of brewers exploring all of the kind of adjacent territory, whether that's hop water, whether that's cannabevs. There's a whole bunch of stuff there, and of course, breweries are not just makers of products; they're also, by and large, places in local communities where people come and spend time with each other. There's a lot of those third spaces in many, many communities. And so breweries are providing lots and lots of functions across that. We're going to look at some of the trends as Doug sees it across all of those things. We're going to look at what flavors are on the rise. We're going to talk about what this year might have in store for IPA as a category. We're definitely going to look at NA and low alc impacts. We're going to look at some of those drinking trends and where we think those things are going. It's interesting. Last year, if you had asked everyone, everyone's stopping drinking, and seems like some of the data is not necessarily leading us in that same direction now. And we're also maybe seeing a cultural narrative go in a different kind of direction. And then we're going to look at what the future holds for breweries themselves. There's certainly different approaches. There's a tighter focus. There's more generality. And I think the most interesting thing is that every brewer today, there's not one answer for any of this. That every brewery, every beer maker is local, and and even if you're a national brand, as I was driving to the office today, drove by and there was a big distributor's truck out there, and it was Pacifico Cerveza for the slopes. So even if you were a Mexican beer brand selling light Mexican lager here in the United States, you were selling it here in Colorado, you're tying it into the mountains and snow sports. And so even for national brands, those local tie-ins really matter. And for local breweries, that connection with what their local audience needs from them, depending on what the scale of the brewery is, and all of that, what their drinkers are interested in, all of those things vary place to place. So this is by no means going to be a one size fits all prescription for what everyone should do. Do not take it that way. So we're going to talk about all of those things. But before we start that, I do want to say, I want to give a heartfelt thanks to my business partner, Hayden Strauss, who after 11 years here with Unfiltered Media and Craft Beer and Brewing has decided to pursue a different career opportunity in the tech space. And, we've worked so closely together for 11 years now. It's kind of we're happy for him, but also bummed that we're not going to get to work with him on a daily basis. He was absolutely instrumental in the startup of this podcast and marketing all of our stuff. Has handled the entire digital side and digital marketing side of Craft Beer and Brewing and Unfiltered Media for the last 11 years. And so all the best to Hayden in his future career endeavors, and our paths will cross again for beers, regardless of where he's working. Just wanted to throw that out before we start. Also, before we dive into today's episode, a quick word for the brewers out there staring down a broken chiller. You know the pain. Warm fermenters, stressed yeast, and that sinking feeling when the repair quote lands in your inbox. With refrigerant regulations changing and the cost of obsolete refrigerants skyrocketing, sometimes the fix costs more than the unit's worth. G&D Chillers is there to help, whether you're a small brew pub or a large full-scale production brewery. Don't throw good money at bad equipment. Invest in a solution that grows with your brewery and keeps your tanks cold when it counts. Big thanks to G&D Chillers for supporting this podcast since 2019. Reach out to them at gdchillers.com to learn how they can support your next 6 years of growth. And Berkeley Yeast just launched Dry Tropics London, their best-selling liquid yeast strain now with all the ease of use benefits of dry yeast. Dry Tropics London delivers the soft, pillowy mouthfeel and juicy character you'd expect from a top-tier London ale strain, but with a serious upgrade, a burst of thiols that unleash vibrant, layered notes of grapefruit and passion fruit. A lot of brewers love the clean passion fruit you get from Tropics, but they don't want every IPA to be a tropical fruit bomb. At the dry yeast price point, you can pitch and ditch without breaking the bank, or you can co-pitch with your house strain to adjust the intensity of the notes. And with nationwide free shipping, there's never been a better time to try Dry Tropics. Order now at berkeleyyeast.com and experience the ease and impact of Dry Tropics London yeast. Also, this episode is sponsored by PackTech, delivering craft beer multi-packing you can trust. PackTech's handles are made from 100% recycled plastic and are fully recyclable, helping breweries close the loop and advance the circular economy. With a minimalist design, durable functionality you can rely on, and custom color matching, PackTech helps brands stand out while staying sustainable. Trusted by craft brewers nationwide, they offer a smarter, sustainable way to carry your beer. To learn more, visit packtech-opi.com. That's PAKTECH-OPI.com. Doug, let's start off with a little bit, it's been a couple of years since we talked last for the podcast, but get us up to date on what life has meant for you and this latest venture in Bright Bev and everything else. Tell us about what you've been up to.
Sure. So this has just actually turned into a pretty natural continuation of my career and kind of where I always wanted to end up. So, I had an accounting background, was a CPA. That's how I ended up at Reyes Holdings back in 2009. So largest beer distribution company in the country. And there I was part of their internal audit department and eventually got a chance to run it for my last 3 years there. So I stayed until 2016. Well before that, probably around 2010 is when I got the craft beer bug. I had always been into more flavorful beer, but wanted to get on the beer side of the business. They do multiple things besides beer. I was more kind of covering the entire company, and I really wanted to get involved hands-on day-to-day in the beer business. And so that led to me starting to create content, trying to put myself out there to turn a black and white resume into something a little more interesting to folks who work in beer. That led to the opportunity to join Revolution Brewing. So I spent 9 years there, but really learned the business from the middle tier. And that's why I've always had this passion for distribution and just how hard it is, what it takes to be successful. It requires a lot more than a lot of people think when they first get involved in it. And through my 9 years at Revolution, and especially the last year and a half, I got to know my now business partner, who's a neighbor of mine. He lives probably 5-6 blocks from me, Jeff Agassi. He was the president of 10th and Blake, so the Molson Coors craft beer arm, up until when they sold to Tilray Brands. And our kids were on the same baseball team, and so we got to talking and spent a whole summer talking trends, talking about our, really learning that we aligned on a lot of things, but especially around this passion for what it takes to be successful in the world of distribution. And Jeff had always had this idea for this business that eventually got named BrightBev. And so when he had the chance to start something new, he kind of brought me into the conversations early. And then within 6 months of that starting up, he had, asked if I wanted to join him on this venture. So that was in May when I left Revolution Brewing, where I spent half my time there running finance, and then the more recent half running their marketing team. So I got to, be a leader at the company from two very, very different perspectives that also helps in this business, where what we're doing is working with a pretty small number of startup companies like ourselves, but who are entering a space that we're excited about as well. So this kind of dovetails into what I've been doing all this time, which is making content about the things that excite me, the trends that I love to talk about. That leads to a natural introduction to companies who are doing something about what I've just made a video on or made a blog post on. So I've kept up with the content and even invested more time into it, because it ends up serving as a natural pipeline in a way to our business, to find these companies that we figure out that we align with values-wise. They're operating in a space that we think will have interested distributors who are good distributors wanting to have a meeting, have an introduction, and then we partner with them to make sure that they're doing all the right things that it takes to be successful in that world, which is an endless list.
And just like us, you kind of move up and down through that world. You appeal to beer consumers and that kind of audience with a bit of humor and levity, and yet also through the same kind of platform provide some interesting insight and nuanced thought around general trends in the business itself. And for those larger breweries, it's a unique thing. It's something that we embrace. Obviously, we have both a business side and general consumer side. It's hard to kind of thread that needle and be equally important to both of those. And you are operating in both of those spaces in the same kind of way.
Thanks. It's something I don't even think about. And I think it just happens naturally because I am a consumer. Like, I am hyper-analyzing everything I drink and love to try everything. And I still have that in me. And that's how I wanted to work in this business. I love being a consumer so much that I wanted to, my day-to-day to be this just relatable passion. But then I love talking about the inside baseball parts of it. And I love talking with consumers who are curious enough and open-minded to know, well, that's not actually true. Here's how it really works, or here's all the other things you have to think about. It's not exactly that simple. So
you're piercing the veil, pulling the curtain aside and sharing some of that inside look with everybody. No, I think it's important, and of course, lots of folks out there in the beer business in general are paying attention. And so we're gonna, through the course of this, let's dive in and get some of that inside baseball, because our audience here is certainly interested in that kind of level, and also able to process the idea that what we're talking about isn't simple. It isn't reductive. It's not if you just do this, you're going to be successful as a brewery, or we're all going to be doing this year. There is just not a one size fits all plan for how to be successful or what people want to drink. So much of it is localized, and so much of it is contextually relevant as those contexts change depending on where you are, what time of year it is, what the scale of a business might be, and all of those other things. So let's get into some of those notes. But before we do, the multi-layered wonders of indie hop strata are now easier than ever for brewers to tap into. Introducing Strata Cryo in collaboration with Yakima Chief hops. Whether brewing up a single hop strata IPA to wow customers with the depth of flavor this variety delivers, or modernizing your flagship IPA to continue setting the highest standards, Strata T99, Strata CGX, Strata Hyperboost, and now Strata Cryo provide the tools for brewers to create their unique masterpiece. Indie Hop Strata, life is short. Let's make it flavorful. And this podcast is sponsored by the Midea 50/50 Flex, the industry's first dual compartment 3-way convertible freezer. The 50/50 Flex is designed to flex with your life. It can convert to all fridge, all freezer, or half and half with just the touch of a button. Plus, with reversible doors and adjustable storage compartments, you can stay organized no matter what your food or beverage storage needs. The 50/50 Flex is also designed to maintain a stable temperature even in non-climate controlled spaces, so it's perfect for your garage, man cave, or wherever you need a little more space. Maybe use all 20 cubic feet as a beer fridge. Check out midea.com/US for more information on how to take your beer storage to the next level. Also, if your brewery is using fruit juice concentrates, purees, and blends, then why not source everything from a one-stop shop? Old Orchard might be best known for flavored blends, but if you need 100% purees or concentrates, then Old Orchard can likely help, even with options not listed on their website. Let Old Orchard know what you need at oldorchard.com/brewer. That's oldorchard.com/brewer. Let's kick things off with a discussion of flavor.
Okay.
I love this kind of this idea because we take flavor for granted. It's just something that's around us in all of our lives. But just like there are in the world of color, there are forecasters that will predict years out what the biggest color trends are going to be, so that those manufacturers of products or paint or furniture or clothing and whatever, who have to get things into the works years ahead of time in order to be at market at the right time, have that thing. So too does that exist in the world of flavor. There are those forecasters, those futurists of sort, that try to see what those trends are around flavor. And for craft brewers, craft beer, I think one of those crucial selling points, I don't think you'd argue with me on this, is that flavor matters. I mean, that is one of the ways that craft beer has become relevant to a broader kind of consumer market. So Doug, let's talk about flavor in a general sense, and then try to kind of hone that down into some of the broader trends you see in maybe even different pieces in different parts of the country, for that matter, or around the world. From a general sense, what do you think is going on in this world of flavor? Are there some broad trends the brewers should be paying attention to?
One thing that I think should make everyone optimistic, but maybe realize they need to maybe reframe how they talk about flavor, is just, if you go to any beverage conference over the last 2 years, all they're talking about, and I'm not talking about beer at all, where let's say a lot of distributors are in the audience and they're seeing all their, craft overall being down, and all they're talking about, hey, what people want is flavor forward, flavor centric, flavor this, flavor that. And that's what craft beer's proposition has kind of been all along. And I don't think they're talking about themselves like exactly like that. And they're not necessarily talking about the same things. But it plays into the fact that
we love to talk about style more than flavor, and maybe that's to our own detriment, huh?
Yeah, that's where I think it's gone. And I think it made sense at the time, but I think it's evolved away from that. And so I always say, maybe we need to spend more time talking about what does it taste like versus all these style riffs, and really make it louder and prouder as part of the packaging if we're talking about a can on the shelf.
What does that mean in practical sense? From putting on your marketer hat, how did pragmatically you take that understanding and turn it into ways to connect certain beers that you all were making? Because this is this interesting problem. Brewers, your R&D folks come up with interesting ideas, like, oh, this is kind of cool. We like the way this moves, or we think this is going to resonate with this certain kind of part of our audience. And they come up with some test batches, and you kind of hone those through. But now you have a beer that you want to bring out there. And the real challenge begins because now you as a marketer have to find a way to make people care about that and connect drinkers to that in some meaningful way in a very crowded marketplace where everyone is trying to do that. So in that sense, how do you tell some of that flavor story?
Like one example I would use is, if we could agree on the fact that over the last, let's say 15 years, the real, this era of craft beer, the most popular hop you would probably say is Citra. And there was a period, especially when it was new and really lasting at least a good 8 years from the beginning of that window. It was among the hottest things out there. And I would always tell people, imagine if that was called something else that didn't also kind of imply the word citrus, which is what those beers taste like. And is there probably something to that this was so popular because it was so relatable versus if it had this, cryptic name that it was maybe a fun, cool name, but didn't really inform you in any way about what you were going to do. So then when people read citrus, see it on the menu, see it on the can, taste it, and they're like, that is citrusy. I like that. And you now have this like triangulated connection to it that people are like, I like that. I want more of that. And then they see Citra anywhere and they're like, I like that. I want it. And they've just like decided they're going to like the next one before they even taste it because they pre-decided, I like Citra. That's just like one like example I think anybody could probably relate to, where the name of something and what it implies can dictate a lot of your success, or just like how far this could go.
I always love to remind brewers as we're coaching on the way that people build these kinds of this language around beer, that the power of suggestion is insanely strong. And if you look at the description that a brewer might put on a beer can or write about it on Untapped, especially on Untapped, like any brewer can go do this exercise. Look at the description that a brewer writes on Untapped for a beer, and then look at any of the written comments that someone might make about that beer. You will see the same exact language used from that description in those same reviews. Like the power of that suggestion is incredibly strong. And so doing it right, where someone reads it and like, oh yeah, I totally taste that, gives that consumer a win as they're tasting it. Like, oh yeah, no, I totally get that. Like you make them feel smart by making that connection. And the flip side is also true, where you write that as your description. I didn't really get that in that beer. And now you're in a difficult position if you didn't deliver on some of the promise that language made for it.
Yeah, I think it can put you in situations where you have to decide, do you want to go with your personal philosophy, or do you want to go with what will work, especially with a wider group of consumers? I could give you an example of what I mean. Revolution, every IPA for the most part that we made had hero in it. And it just let people, it was just an easy way to communicate. Hero means IPA. They'll all be different. They can be different. Everything except style is generally in the realm of IPA. And there were terms, especially when we were eventually making a more high gravity one that would compete in the Voodoo Ranger world, where it was like, some would say, we should just call it Juicy Hero. And there was also like, but aside, that was just like, that just sounds so lame. And this is supposed to be like a fun series that's like creating our own Marvel comic universe. And it's just like, man, is that lame to call it Juicy Hero? And we wouldn't. In this case, we would call it X Hero. And X has a lot of meaning. It was 10%, so Roman numeral 10. X being more extreme, the most extreme one we had ever made. There are all these like good storytelling opportunities, but you always had to ask yourself, are we overthinking it, or are we putting our philosophy, which is cool. I love when people put their philosophy ahead of anything else. I think that those kind of things can work in the long term. But you're like, is this going to make more work for us and all of our partners to explain what this means, when if it was just called Juicy Hero, it would probably work with especially the people buying said beer. And it's just like, you just eventually get to the point where you're like, I just don't want to I don't want to have to keep saying Juicy Hero. It's just, Yeah, that kind of thing.
There's a lot of power in that word juice and
Yes.
juicy, and it's no shocker. Again, it kind of comes back to that descriptive piece, right? You're telling people what to expect in terms of flavor from the name right there. And, Voodoo Ranger Juice Force, is quite an economic force in the beer
Yeah.
market right now. Fruit Force, they've leaned into these kinds of extensions of those brands that connect with exactly what you're saying, describing exactly what the flavor is going to be.
Yeah, but in terms of flavor, I do think there's a couple different ways to talk about it and think about it. There's the idea that, there's a lot of people who say, I don't like the taste of beer. And I think a lot of those people kind of wish they did. And so flavor can be a gateway to, well, beer could taste like this. Here's a beer with, I'll just use like bush apple, a phenomenon of the last many years, but this year it hit another level from pent up demand that really got a lot of attention. But using flavor as a gateway to beer, a gateway to a brand or a family of brands, that could then maybe make you willing to take another stab at it, especially maybe a few years later, where sometimes just that taste for beer just takes a little while. And you need this introductory level that kind of takes you halfway there, but uses flavor. So is there an opportunity, and perhaps there is, for brands in creative ways to sell beer that has flavor in their own unique way, but kind of that same approach that a bush apple has taken, maybe more thoughtful, maybe more authentic tasting. Seeing examples of this, like Shorts in Michigan released their own apple version of their Locals Light, but they called it Honey Crisp, the type of apple you get in Michigan. They used real apple juice and all these things to make it a elevated version of that, still very reasonably priced and all that. And there's new brands coming. A client of ours, Girl Beer, is making flavored beer and using it as a way to speak to young women in a different way with irreverent humor. But really thinking about like let's just say like Smirnoff Ice consumer buying FMBs. Is that someone who kind of wish they liked beer, the ritual of beer being maybe more powerful than some FMB brands? Would they be open to this if there was one that kind of catered to their personality through a brand that is fun and energetic and kind of speaks about beer in a exciting new way to them?
It's interesting that all the examples you're using here are talking about fruit in basically like a pale lager or light lager kind of space. That so much of the use of fruit. I mean, if you track it back, you're gonna get back to like Kriek and Framboise, from the old the classic Belgian beers. But then in the last decade, fruit became. I mean, initially, if I look back to the '90s and early 2000s. It was always a fruited wheat beer, right? Like that, it was going to be a fruited wheat beer, and everyone's going to have a fruited wheat beer on their tap list, and it was probably going to be one of the biggest selling beers for most of those breweries. And then last decade, that just kind of went just full on into heavy, thick, smoothie, sour, much more acid focused, much heavier fruit focus, but also a lot more calories and a lot more heft in those, and beers that were hard to drink more than one of because they were just so substantial. And I've been having this conversation, like Paul at Cinderlands, we were talking about that. He, like it was about a year ago when we talked, they had revamped their entire fruit beer approach for the craft brewery and moved away. They still made a couple, every now and then they'd make some of that kind of smoothie sour beers, but they were going very, very heavy into the light lager with fruit flavor. And is that a general trend that you think we're going to see more of this year?
I do. Yeah. I mean, I've seen a few brands. There's one in the UK that's really interesting called Jubal, and their initial flavor was peach. And they just go about it a different way. It's not about local. It's not about experience the romanticism of beer at our brewery. Of course, a flavored beer doesn't evoke that kind of emotion. So everything they show is at a a concert or a big experiential event, and that's probably where they spend a lot of their marketing dollars, is sponsoring those type of events to get their product there. And it's just a different way to make beer maybe more interesting, welcoming, or fitting to a younger consumer.
Are there any particular fruit flavors, or not even just fruit flavors, but other types of culinary flavors that you think? Because we also exist in this continuum, right? People are pulling from all of these avenues. We see things like, I've recently seen Mediterranean food like get a little bit of a lift. Because I'm eating more kava, now, fast casual when I go out. And those chains existed, like, Garbanzo's doing the same kind of food, but kava just does it better and it's more flavorful and interesting. So now I consume harissa at a much greater rate than I ever did, say, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And that changes my palate and the way that I approach this. Now I'm, going in for pickled cabbage and roasted corn and hot harissa and, and all the tzatziki and these kinds of things, but that changes my palate, right? Like now all of a sudden I am more tuned into those kinds of flavors and interested in what they are. And so when WeldWerks last year launched a Euro Goza with this kind of tzatziki approach, like I actually really loved that beer. It was phenomenal. Like, that kind of cucumber and yogurt like flavor, it really, really worked. And for all the stunt beers that they make, like that one, I thought was just a delicious beer on its own. So are there some other kinds of flavor contexts that you see changing, from what we're consuming that might be impacting what we also might want to drink?
Yeah. I think I could at least make a solid case for 10 or more different ones. I'll give you maybe 3 that can come to mind first. I do need to acknowledge that I think apple will be a big one. It's not as fun to say because we've heard about Busch Light apple for years now. And because they were an interesting thing to think about with apple beer is, when do you release it? Because it feels like a fall seasonal, but fall is also craft beer's time to shine, with Oktoberfest and so many other great styles for that September through November holiday season when in there. So I don't think that's why Busch Light does it in the spring. I actually don't know exactly why they do, but that's their spring release. Anyway, because they did it in the spring, a lot of craft breweries had time in 2015 to react and get an apple beer out. Say, well, if people can't find apple beer, we'll gladly make you an apple beer. So we already started to see some of those. But I just think with another year of planning and thinking about 2026, it just seems natural to me that local breweries are going to make their own, apple lager to combat Busch Light, or just have something in their tap room for that kind of fan that comes in for a birthday party, and will probably sell pretty well.
And cider in general has had a, kind of like it's not
comeback,
like it's not growing like massively, but it's not declining in the way that some of the other beer segments have. It's definitely holding its own and maybe, growing slightly, showing some interesting signs of life, even in the current space. It kind of connects back to that.
No, I agree. Another one, I could actually give you 2 at the same time, because one of the big trend spaces that my partner Jeff and I have been interested in 2025, and I think this will continue forward because these things take a lot longer than a year to develop, is international flavors. In part, you could create a whole narrative as to why, but part of that is because of international travel being through the roof compared to what it had been since COVID, and thinking about where people are traveling to. And a huge one is Japan, and becoming more immersive in Japanese culture. So this was something I was talking about a lot heading into 2025. I think we saw a lot of breweries making more Japanese inspired styles, working those kind of flavors. And not new. Again, yuzu's been around for a while. Off Color Brewing here in Chicago has been making a yuzu version of Fierce, one of their most popular beers, for a while. But I think yuzu has been, exploding in popularity. And it's just, to me, like a bulletproof ingredient in terms of being likable. I think just like anything with some yuzu in it tastes wonderful. Just think it's a great fruit. Another one that's more obscure that I've started to see popping up is cherry blossom. So I've seen like the NA brewery Rationale released a cherry blossom beer, and that got on my radar, and then all of a sudden it started standing out to me as I'd see it other places. But another way to connect Japanese culture into American brewing. And I love these concepts even more when that's the background of the brewery founder or the head brewer proposing these beers. Like I talked to a member of the team at Maui Brewing because I was talking about a rice lager that they do, and they put a lot of emphasis into the story of where that rice is sourced from and the town and the history of this type of rice that they use to make their rice lager. And I'm like, that is cool. If it were like me doing this, it doesn't have as good of a history and lineage to it. But when there's that extra layer to the story, it gives you a lot of ammunition for getting people excited to try this when you can connect the dots to a lot more than just, here we're normally a hazy IPA brewery, but here's a rice lager we made, and that's kind of it. That doesn't, that's fine. It probably might taste very good, but I love it when there's, a little more to it. And I think that's when these things can travel farther and resonate wider.
Sure. Telling that authentic story still so important. We've seen some interesting ones. I remember. I know there's. I think it was Godspeed that we wrote a breakout brewer story on years ago, up in Toronto, and they make a green tea beer and source their green tea from a tea farm in Japan, where that was in the hometown of one of the founders of the brewery. And so, again, makes a nice little connection there. Rice lager in general, seeing so much growth, kind of paralleling what we see in Mexican lager, same kind of thing. I think that there's this interesting connection that people have. They want those beers are both crisp, light, easy to drink, but also kind of evoke some other sense of place and feel kind of, connective and transformative and at the same time. And I think some of those two things together makes it kind of interesting.
Yeah, I totally agree. And then the last one is something I talked about this week that's, I had to preface it with, again, I'm sorry to keep doing this, but I know this is not new. I just think it's going to take on new forms and maybe get treated a little differently, and that's pickle. Pickle beer, we've been seeing craft breweries do that for about 10 years, especially in the last 5. And then, but I think that flavor has all of a sudden become extremely mainstream, where there's just increasingly more and more people open to it. Whether you're buying sunflower seeds, potato chips, or sometimes these, limited edition fast food restaurant menus will run like for an entire month, a whole pickle themed menu. And it's just like pickle keeps growing in popularity. And yes, I know a lot of breweries released for 1 month a limited edition one for like on a really small level. And now we have Donna's Pickle Beer, who's a whole company built around the idea of pickle beer. I just think it's going to keep taking on more forms, especially with breweries and new brands making like ready to drink cocktails. Not what I know we're going to talk about today, but I think we're going to see pickle enter spaces like that, where it's maybe you'll find a few here and there, but it hasn't really taken over as a trend. I think we're just going to see pickle in more places.
Pickle is a really big deal right now.
Exactly.
Oh, there's my dad joke for the episode. Okay, well, let's change gears. We'll talk about trends in IPA next. But before we do that, Brightly Software, a Siemens company, partners with organizations at every stage of their asset lifecycle journey. Brightly is a complete asset management and operations software that enhances organizational sustainability, compliance, and efficiency through data-driven decision-making. Streamline maintenance, simplify capital planning, and optimize resources with solutions uniquely designed to support long-term goals. Learn more at brightlysoftware.com. IPA is a big subject, Doug. It's roughly 40%, maybe even a little more now, of the entire craft beer world. It's something that we can talk about. Like, for a lot of people out there, if you mention craft beer, they almost axiomatically connect that with IPA. You say craft, it is almost shorthand for IPA because it's just so connected.
Especially if they don't like them, then they definitely do that. People that love craft beer might not make that same, but people that don't like craft beer just say, yes, it's all IPA.
It's all so hoppy. Sure. It's all too hoppy. But in this world of IPA, we have a whole lot of different, like even talking about it as one thing almost doesn't make sense because there is, we've seen some, some potential trends in hoppy beer at lower ABV strengths, pale ale, XBA kind of growing significantly. Thankfully, we've kind of gotten rid of the term session IPA for the most part, but there are great beers that are now kind of scratching that itch at lower ABV. We're seeing different kinds of contexts for ABV. There is still big hazy double IPA, like intensely hop saturated. We're also seeing a huge growth. I shouldn't say growth because like West Coast IPA never really went away. It's always been here, and it even with the hazy thing, and now it kind of exists in this multiverse of IPA as a parallel universe to the hazy IPA world, with consumers going back and forth between those two. But a lot of interesting and creative work amongst focused West Coast IPA brewers in making those beers a little more balanced, much more drinkable, and really, really compelling. So in a broad sense, kind of outline for me what you think the major trends in 2026 are around IPA. They're obviously things that we've seen growing in 2025 and are not going to be brand new. I'm going to get your caveat in there for you so you don't have to say it. But what do you think? What do you think these kind of major kind of trend areas are for IPA?
I think an interesting place to start, just because of the last topic being flavor and talking about flavorings, is terpenes. So an increased use of terpenes, again, not new, but pretty new in terms of a couple years, in terms of the level of use that they're getting, both from the high end. When I say high end, I mean ABV, and the increased use of terpenes in a way to make some of those 10% IPAs affordable to consumers, where you swap some of your dry hop for terpenes so that the flavor still delivers. Not that it's the same, but in intensity, you can pick up the intensity and save a good bit of money on how much you're spending on dry hop, basically to get it to a price that's like a normal everyday price for an IPA, but at this higher ABV. So
yes, if you're a brewer brewing 2,000 barrel batches of a 10% IPA, and you want that kind of saturation and flavor, there is no amount of actual dry hop material that you could add to that beer to get it to that level of, like, it is functionally impossible. There is just not a method to do that outside of terpenes, extract, and some of these modern hop products. I mean, the sheer amount of hop matter that it would take to do that would just be impossible from a production standpoint.
And your losses would be off the charts, which makes the cost of the beer insane. So there's that angle of it, which isn't. These are more just like, this isn't so much a prediction, but just like kind of an acknowledgement of this flavor crossover into the IPA world. One thing that's interesting with flavor and IPA, to me, is the low end. So you mentioned session IPA, and where a lot of those felt short is that lower malt bill, the hops fade fast. They do not hold up on a warm shelf. And a session IPA by a good brewery might taste good at the brewery because of it being in a keg and being cold stored the whole time. But you get one that's 4 months old sitting on a warm shelf for that long, and boy, can that disappoint you. And a lot have gone away with that being one of maybe potentially many reasons. But using flavors, using terpenes, that's an interesting way to get a low ABV to get a good amount of its flavor in a shelf-stable way, in a way that's going to taste good. One that I've tried is the dad strength of the, I think it's like 2.8 9, something like that, IPA. And they have like a West Coast one and then a juicy one. And the juicy one, you could tell, uses some kind of way of, boosting the fruit that is not hop derived. And I thought it was pretty pleasant and good, and didn't have some of the missing pieces that some of the old low ABV session IPAs had. And remember the cup of coffee that low-cal IPAs had right when the pandemic was about to happen? Like everybody launched a low-cal IPA, and those were very, very short-lived.
Thankfully.
So when people hear me bring up these newer low ABV IPA brands, they always tell me like, "Isn't this just session IPA remarketing itself?" And I'm like, maybe, but maybe that's because maybe it's just timing. Sometimes a good idea is just too early. Maybe session IPA was too much of brewers saying, "Hey, we need something lower that we can drink behind in the back of the brewery after work, so we're going to make it." And maybe they were onto something, but just too early for it to try to get as big as it did. And maybe the world only needed an all-day IPA and maybe a few others, and not 1,000 of these to hit the market. But then you had the low-cal IPA trend that really, everybody, Firestone Walker, I remember Oscar Blues, in one year, a lot of the big names around the top 10 of craft breweries right at the beginning of 2020 released a low-cal IPA. And then we never know what would have happened had the pandemic not happened, which changed every, in different ways at different times of it, how people were looking at alcohol. But all of a sudden, a low-cal IPA was not something anybody was thinking about in the spring and summer of 2020. And then here it is again, kind of, presenting itself in a different way, and even lower way, but using the moderation movement as a reason for it, to say, hey, if non-alcoholic IPAs are doing great, and we're also hearing that people drinking those aren't giving up alcohol entirely, they're rotating them in, then maybe is this actually the right time for a 3% IPA if we can find a way to deliver on flavor in a way that's satisfying. And back to the original point, can flavor as a not complete substitute, but as a supplement to hops, help these, maintain the quality and taste in a consistent way that isn't going to just die thanks to a lack of a malt backbone that is naturally going to happen with a lower ABV beer.
It feels like West Coast pills and New Zealand pills also kind of scratch that same itch, in this 4.5 to 5.5% range, with some of that kind of crispness that people want, some of that kind of definition and contrast, and a light body, but using hops in a very strategic way. Lesser amounts of them, in that kind of context, give the same kind of effect. And so now all of a sudden I can drink a few of those rather than, drinking one bigger IPA, but it feels like, oh, I'm drinking a Pilsner, like I'm keeping it light. It seems to connect there. Any potential and growth there that you see?
I think the hardest part will just be explaining it. And, right now I just see those as, the current craft beer consumer is who those are going to be attractive to. The consumer who drank a ton of double IPAs from 2013 till recently, that to me, if you're used to drinking 9%ers, 8%ers, then this 4.5 option, that is like mid-strength to that person, because it's coming close to cutting it in half. Whereas the ones I was talking about, these 2.5%ers, maybe that's for people who usually drink like an American lager, 5%. So them, that's half. So
it's all about the context. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that it might, I think New Zealand Pilsner might just go over the head in terms of like why that should be interesting to the people that aren't thinking about craft beer, paying attention to it on at least a intermediate level. So I
just call it passion fruit pills instead of New Zealand pills if you actually want to sell it.
That's like my X-Hero, Juicy Hero example, or of like, that would make me cringe, but it probably would work better. And it's like, which do you want? And neither is perfect. So, but yeah, I love drinking those styles. I think they're wonderful. Like Timbo Pills to me is is a beer I hold in very high regard, and others that I've tried kind of deliver on a similar level. So I hope to see them. I just don't know how they break through to the people that put very little thought into their beer purchase. They just want it to be quick, has to make sense immediately. I don't know how they do it on those, given the price that they'll probably need to be.
Explain to me the kind of like consumer logic behind IPA now, because it seems like, again, there's just not one story. There are some extraordinarily successful brands, of 19.2, stovepipes with 9 and 10% ABV, quote unquote IPAs or double IPAs or imperial IPAs that are just growing like gangbusters. But then there's also this kind of dad strength, or like 2.9 to 3.2% kind of growth. Like there's your normal 6.5 to 7.5% IPA, both hazy and West Coast, that an American that is still kind of holding its own. You've got the kind of double IPA of intensely saturated, but also very expensive, of hazy double IPAs from, that kind of leading edge of craft brewer focused on saturation, not kind of market penetration. And, and so there's just lots of but there's not one piece that you can hang on and say, oh, this is where things are going. Because these are different kinds of audiences for each one of those kinds of beer.
Yeah. And I think those audiences, I think it really depends on what their past relationship with craft beer is, what level of a fan were they, and were they an enthusiast on message boards, arguing in Facebook groups, this and that. If you give me that kind of bio for someone, I can probably pin pretty accurately on where they land on all those options you said, versus someone, it's like if you gave them a quiz and see how they did on the quiz, you could probably pin the type of IPA they're interested in. I like to point to, this isn't exactly answering your question, but I think this is interesting in that there's like a line in the sand that I don't know, you could argue when it should be. For me, it's somewhere around 2016, 2017, where launching a new brand just didn't hit the way it used to. When Revolution would come out with a new year-round beer, roughly line in the sand 2017, it was a big deal. And anyone in Illinois that was into craft beer would be like, well, I'm definitely trying that at least once. I'm definitely buying a 6-pack. And so whatever you put out would have a good chance of success, because you'd instantly get anybody who's paying attention to try it, in part because there were just only so many breweries at that point. There had been a lot of new ones by then, but there wasn't this whatever number wave you want to call the post-2017 level. After that is when it really got especially crowded. Anyway, there's a lot of people who choose Revolution, their flagship IPAs, Anti-Hero. If you look at what that's doing in data compared to their other one, it's just like so many other breweries where, man, that beer that you made, that IPA that you made from the beginning, that thing is half your sales and holding pretty strong. It's just a newer rotational stuff that's where a lot of the damage is happening for a lot of more established brands that have been around to 10, 15 years. And so there's just so many people, let's say in Chicago and surrounding areas, that don't even think about Anti-Hero as a craft beer and part of this, community, this anything. They just think of it as like, oh, that's the Chicago IPA. I like that. When I go to a Cubs game, I want to get a little more bang for my buck. I'm getting an Anti-Hero. It's a Chicago beer. I'm at a Cubs game, whether I go all the time or not. And there's just these beers that got this head start before there were countless choices. And those are just like permanently, at least for decades, at this place where it's not that they don't need to keep investing in them, because you do. You always need to keep working for these brands and find new ways, new situations to get it in. But there's like a too big to fail size for some of these, think like Surly Furious, think, you could come up with a ton of California examples, but these ones that have been there 10, 15 years, nothing you release now with any new hop, any new anything can ever become, it's like they cannot catch up to that. And like, I feel like Sierra Nevada with Hazy Little Thing, like just got that in time. They were first and early to adopting hazy as a large brewer, but that's like right around this line in the sand I'm talking about, where like anything after that just like can't get that instant jump into people's, how people think about it, because there's just too many now.
That is kind of interesting, and I think it speaks to another kind of broader trend that we're seeing, which is some sort of kind of I wouldn't say it a retreat to those kinds of brands, but though some of these more classic brands from craft breweries do seem to be gaining some strength, primarily because yes, I think there is some fatigue amongst drinkers. Like again, there is that person that's going to go to the brewery tap room, go to that like high-end craft beer bar where they're always looking for something new, and yet from a general standpoint, some of the larger distribution world is less and less and less interested in these constantly rotating SKUs and these brand new beers that are going to pop up and be there for a few months and then disappear because they just can't get out there widely enough to make a real dent in that kind of business. And yet then you have things like Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, like still just on a streak, just still continuing to get it done over and over again, year after year, month after month. But then on the flip side, you also have someone like New Belgium, who, yes, it's a Voodoo Ranger beer, but the Voodoo Ranger that's doing really well now is only 2 or 3 years old, and they've got a couple of different iterations up there at the top of the sales chart, while Fat Tire keeps kind of, bumping down and down and down. And so, like, there's also just not one explanation for that. Again, it's kind of contextual and challenging to understand.
Yeah, I think the Voodoo Ranger has just been fun for me to follow, not because I, enjoy putting down a ton of Juice Force, but just you can kind of like figure out what they're learning themselves. And, Juice Force was a runaway hit. And then I don't know if this is the exact order, but I think Tropic Force came next. And it was like all of a sudden that thing was going, maybe not toe to toe with Juice Force, but it was like, wow, a second one is now killing it as well. So they of course made a third one. And then it was like the third one was like, hit the brakes, like 3 might be too many. And it's like maybe the person that is buying these does not care about rotation and it constantly needing to be new. And I think maybe it's available in certain channels and not others, but I know they at least dialed back that third one. And now they waited, they paused a year. Like last year, they didn't release a new one for the first time since it's become this runaway hit. But then this year they are, but it's a 11%er. So the whole thing with this one is like, forget that 9.5. This one, I use the, taking it to dialing it up to an 11 analogy. So the new one is using more ABV to, it's like furthering the extremes of beer that we're seeing, where we hear all about NA, and then we hear about the extremes continuing to be pushed between flavor, ABV, and oftentimes both. But it's interesting to think, like, does that consumer, this kind of, whether it's the convenience store shopper who's, substituting Voodoo Ranger for something else strong that they used to drink before that, or just sees it as a good deal, doesn't mind, likes those kind of natural flavors. When you think about that person, they don't care as much about there being a new IPA of the month. And so maybe and you see like not a lot of rotation needed there, but I think they see different answers between convenience stores and a grocery store. Where at the grocery store, you see them developing new products that are bringing that ABV down and to more reasonable, more typical levels. And that's what you see in a variety pack. That's what you see, a new one that they're coming out with, I think called Slow Ride, or something like that, where they're coming out with a 6.5%er. So it's like, I was like joking, that's almost like a mid-strength Voodoo Ranger.
It's because they absolutely have done the consumer research and know who it is that's shopping and buying the beer at that grocery store versus who it is walking into that convenience store to buy the beer. And, and there is that's a really interesting effect. I think one of like the big thread here though, is that people are more and more buying things that they have been familiar with and that they've had a positive experience with already, especially as more and more households are facing rising costs across the board for everything there. Like the appetite for risk, and again, there are still those consumers out there that want something new and want something fresh. There's just fewer of them, and they are more focused and amongst certain kinds of brands out there in the broader market. There is absolutely a kind of focus on things, on those brands that consumers know that they can trust and that they've had a good experience with in the past. And then, someone like New Belgium has found a way to like extend that trust for the thing that you did try into this new thing that you try, whereas other brands have just said, hey, here's our green can with pale ale on it from Sierra Nevada. You want to drink this. And then, and then they make a darker green can with pills in these cute little cans. And it's like, oh yeah, I want to drink that too. And it looks kind of like the other one, but it's even lighter. That sounds great. And, they've been able to find ways to just kind of some brand mechanics there that help connect these beers out with people.
Yeah. The idea of rotation, that is less appealing these days. There used to be a time where you felt like you could try them all, even if that's just within one brewery or your couple local breweries, where you felt like you could keep up. And there was also an audience of your friends, your network, who were interested in what you were drinking, and the social side of sharing what you were drinking was at an all-time high for a while because others were interested and looking to learn. And, going back to the whole fatigue level, the risk became, in combining with the economic factors that you mentioned, like the risk factor all of a sudden went up, and it naturally does with a beer that's only been made once before versus being dialed in and made over time, over years, and all that. So all that adding up, it makes sense that the Rotation Nation, the long tail of brands, not the long tail of breweries, but the long tail of brands and portfolios is what's performing the poorest right now, because a lot of times those are new brands that, like I mentioned with the line in the sand, those just like can't break through because of all the noise out there in a way. But
Yeah, I remember in that late 20-teens, I was talking to one brewery. It's like, we've had to adjust where we used to be able to build a brand and know that it's going to be 5 or 10 years, maybe even longer, from it. Like now we launch a new brand and it's got 2 years and then it's dead. And then we've got then it comes out of the lineup and we're starting something new. And then of course you start thinking about it that way as a business, and it lowers the investment that you put into upfront of building and marketing that kind of brand. So it almost becomes a self-fulfilling cycle. If you know you're not going to get that many years out of it, you may tailor your initial investment for a launch knowing that you're not going to get that long-term payoff. And then you dial that back and so it becomes this almost vicious cycle in the business world. Huh?
Yeah. The best thing you can do is at least be self-aware, like you're stating, and know that if you know that's the case, then the disappointment isn't there and the planning and the investment behind it is done appropriately, versus pouring way too much money into launching something that just can only get to a certain size.
So we see more and more launches starting small, and then when they hit, or if they hit, then scaling rather than trying to start big and make a big splash out of the gate.
Yeah.
And I think that's a reasonable strategy, for smaller craft breweries to take and try to, use the market as its own kind of test.
Yeah, we did that at Revolution with Cold Time, which was the lager, American lager brand that they released. And there was a point where I remember having the debate with Josh, the owner, and he was ready to go. And I was like, it was going to be a bit of a rush to get packaging and everything done, just given the timing of the year that this was happening. I was like, what if we put this on draft for a whole year at our tap room, and think about how between all the Saturdays that are packed and all the Friday nights, think of the thousands and thousands of people that are going to come through here and see that name. And for about a year say, you guys should can that. You guys should can that. You all should can that. And like, let that happen for a year. make any changes you might want to make in that time and really get it down so that when you put it in cans, and a beer like that starts often in a 12-pack, so bigger investment all around, like let that at least have had that year. And then you can offer some draft accounts, the chance to pour it before it's out on shelves and all that, some of your best accounts and all that. And boy, did that help. Because then when you launch it, it's still not enough people that know about it alone to make it a success. But boy, do you have some early adopters that are going to be excited just at the announcement because they already know what it is. Because sometime in the last year, they came to the tap room and tried it. So I love that.
A quick reminder to all the brewers listening out there, that is how Firestone Walker 805 got started, as a tap room only, blonde lager that they made just to make a copyright filing, a trademark filing on the name itself to protect their own area code. And it was a tap room only beer that ultimately, their customers who are there drinking and eating were like, you ought to can this. And next thing you know, like now it's, more than half of their production. I mean, it's that one beer is bigger than, a huge chunk of all craft breweries. Like, I mean, it's kind of, it's a juggernaut. And so that's not the worst strategy to take to kind of build that familiarity.
And give it enough runway where you can actually react and make changes from feedback. Like, don't do this and say, hey, we're going to go draft only for 2 months and then full on package launch into chains. Because at that point, you're stuck anyway. So yeah, you might have got a chance to preview it, but I'm talking like give a chance to like really hear people say, this is good, but it's a little too sweet. And if all of a sudden you look on Untappd and this happened, it's one thing I learned about that beer. No changes were made, but I was like, wow, a recurring comment is people saying this is on the sweeter side. And it's like, we didn't even think about that. But maybe at that point you think about working it into the description, like a touch of sweetness or something like that, compared to a normal lager. And you can just, but knowing those things before you launch and you prepare all your materials, you educate your distributors about how to talk about that. Just sometimes that amount of timeline can really help you perfect what you're about to do and just ultimately put together a better plan.
Yeah, let you market test the naming and the descriptions and all of those kinds of things and see, hey, what do we need to tweak on this? And is this connecting? And does it deliver on what people expect? No, interesting stuff there for sure. Well, let's, we're getting on in time here. I want to talk about general drinker trends before we wrap up. There's last year, if anything was true, it's that we were all hand-wringing over this idea that people just aren't drinking anymore and that Gen Z isn't drinking anymore. And, what's going to be the future of craft beer? The sky is falling. People aren't drinking like they used to. And I think it's been interesting, especially as we ended up the year last year, like, a lot of the data isn't actually saying that. A lot of the polling data generally is showing that a relatively similar amount of people are drinking, but they're all self-reporting that they're drinking lower volumes in aggregate, and that and that kind of seems to track true that things are obviously, people are drinking less beer in general, and that those numbers are coming down. The sales numbers are down, volume numbers are down, but that doesn't mean that fewer people are drinking. It just means they have generally been drinking a little bit less often, or drinking a lower volume, drinking 2 beers instead of 4, and you drink 2 beers a night instead of 4, and that's a 50% reduction, and mathematically you start multiplying that over lots and lots of drinkers, and it gets really significant really, really fast. This year we're starting to see even more of this, hey, maybe last year's narrative wasn't quite right or quite on the money. Young people would probably drink more if they had a better financial position than they're in currently, but the cost of housing and cost of goods is so extreme, the relative to income that that's putting some hamper on that kind of thing. But in general, we're also, even this year, I just saw an article floating around from a writer in GQ about how my New Year's resolution is to drink more in 2026. And so, I'm wondering if there's a cultural shift afoot, if this is just us self-selecting some of the anecdotal points that we want to hear to make ourselves feel better. From your perspective, what do you think is really happening amongst broader drinking habits amongst various generations? and beer drinkers or potential beer drinkers, in North America?
Well, broadly, I think people are definitely being more purposeful with when they choose to drink. I think people are beginning to, this is a trend I hope that continues on, like really prioritize more in-person meetups, heading to the on-premise and not really even thinking twice about what a beer costs on draft because you're there for this moment. I went bowling recently with my kids, and the cost to bowl 2 games and rent shoes for one person was like $27. And so that's pretty much what like 3 craft beers would cost. And I have all these people telling me like craft beer is way too expensive. And I'm like, well, are you sure it doesn't just cost what everything else costs? Have you tried to buy a movie ticket lately and seen like how much those cost? Like, I think everything has just gone up. But I think people in general are willing to pay it because they're cutting back so much. So the cost of the beer is mattering less and less. So that's a trend we're seeing. I do think millennials, especially the people that got the most into craft beer, is the generation cutting back the most right now. And there's trends that are making that even feel more acceptable. It's something people are more proud of, okay with wearing as a badge of honor instead of like less and less feeling to need to explain themselves for not drinking or drinking less. A thing I do sometimes when I want to cut back, if I'm going to a party and I'm like, man, I got to take the kids somewhere at 7 a.m. tomorrow, but I want to have fun at this party. Sometimes I just won't have a drink for the first hour. Instead of like cutting it off early, I'll just like, I could easily get away for this first hour without having one. Then I'll only have 2 or 3 and be in a better spot. And anyway, I just think people are finding their own ways, whether it's through Zebra striping, through, it's so early on the mid-strength beers. I think those are like just getting started, but there's a narrative for where those make a ton of sense. So I think that's why there's more and more openness to that. Wow, if you can give me the flavor that I'm looking for and less ABV, sign me up. For every one of those people, there's someone that says, that makes no sense. That makes no sense to me. That's because they don't think they have a problem, and maybe they don't. But other people are like, yeah, I really could use something that kind of does some of the work for me. I would love to continue drinking 4 beers, and I want it to hit me like 2 beers normally would. That type of thing. So that's why that's always a trend I talk about a lot, really since last year. In craft specifically, I think everybody can relate to this, and this isn't something that's easy to have data on, but if you got into craft beer, you naturally followed a lot of craft breweries. You were seeing new releases on social media all the time. You wanted to frequent breweries, bottle shops, wherever you could purchase these releases. And that became a thing you did because you'd see something and you're like, well, I want that. And then a 4-pack or a 6-pack is in your fridge. But those would compile fast. And I'm not even talking about the rare barrel-aged stuff, even just IPAs and other styles like that. But that puts a pressure on you all week to get through it. And so I think a lot of people were back to the like rotation and showing off what you're drinking, the communal part of like Untapped and Instagramming your beers and getting a lot of people reacting. Oh, how is that? I wanted to try that. Should I get it? Is it worth it? There's a lot less. There's people have kind of given up on keeping up with these things to some extent. There's restraint, like you said, back to flagships. There's less to show off. There's less, of that kind of communication, I think, happening among beer enthusiasts as it's kind of died down a little bit. So I think that has made occasions during the week where a lot of craft beer consumed by people by themselves, or with their spouse or something like that, having a beer on a Wednesday because they wanted to have something to check in and have, people that they're going back and forth with on the comments about how it tastes. As people are going back to those dialed in flagships, there's less to talk about there, and it's more about just enjoying the beer they want. So anyway, that's what I mean by like more purposeful, having more beers when they're out and feeling less pressure to, have a fridge full of one-off limited edition beers that they're trying to get through. And that's why I think those beers are not selling as well.
I even notice it amongst my, with my own kind of beer purchases. I think like I don't have to go to stores and buy beer very often just because simply tasting all the beer that we have to evaluate for the magazine is enough, more than enough beer for me to drink over 10 years, much less 1 year. Like it's an extraordinary amount of pressure to get through the hundreds and hundreds of beers that people send us. So having said that, like, when I do go out for a beer and at a beer bar, meet up with friends, which I still do make a point of doing because I think you're absolutely right. The drinking beer with other people in a social sphere and out is way more fun than sitting there and hyper-analyzing a beer in a glass as I sit at my dining room table. Like, it's just, it's more fun to be out. But if I do go out and buy something, it's going to be one of a very, small number of things. And I am less interested in like trying to buy a 4-pack from across this broad spectrum of beers out there in fridges. And if I walk into my local liquor store and they've got a Westbound Select or a Westbound IPA, pack, 4-pack in the cooler, like I'm going to buy that. If they've got La Cumbre Elevated, I'm going to buy that. I'm going to drink those, because if I'm drinking just, at home and while I'm hanging out with my wife and my kids, like, I don't need to sit there and hyperanalyze or explore things. I just want something I know, but it's only going to be the very best things that I know are the very best. And I don't need to take risks on anything else. I do that in all the others. Whereas if I go out to a bar, like you can order 1 pint of just about anything and, take a flyer on it. But even then, I will still probably order that Bierstadt Lager or that Comrade Superpower IPA, those things that I just know they're going to be good. And I don't know, I think that's an interesting kind of thing. But I also think that it's positive for beer in general because what it says is that, there is some benefit of the meritocracy there. If you make extraordinarily good beer, you can be successful with growing brands in this current market. They just have to be extraordinarily good. And there's not a lot of space at the middle and bottom of the market out there in the distributed kind of consumer world these days.
Agreed. And there are breweries, a ton of breweries doing it exceptionally well. And they all tend to just do a lot of the little things well. And one thing I always point to is, their social media feed. When sometimes you see some of the highest quality brewers out there in terms of the beer that they make and just the way people talk about them and just have nothing but positive things to say about certain breweries. A lot of times you go to their social media feed and every picture of the beer in a glass just also looks perfect. Those beers taste perfect, but they make sure that when it's shown, it's not a blurry, crooked picture from a cell phone. It's actually a nice looking shot that helps further that quality narrative. And that's why I always like to talk about social and the things you can do on there. And, just thinking of like Treehouse, one of the breweries that many hold in the highest regard, deservedly so. You look at their social feed and every picture of every beer just looks immaculate. And it's not just them, it's other breweries that are also pretty much every brewery that's doing well right now. You look at breweries like Big Grove in Iowa, Fieldwork in California, who you're just hearing continued growth, whether that's their numbers in distribution or adding another tap room. Well, the other tap rooms must be doing really well if they're continuing to add numbers 7, 8, and 9 in some of these cases. And it's just, I like to dig into those breweries that I hear doing well. I see in the numbers that I get to look at that they're doing well there. And then I go to their social media feed and I just see crisp, perfect, everything that goes along with that quality narrative.
And, that also tends to extend out into the spaces themselves. Like you see a clean brew house, you see good social media, you see, a tight attention to detail in customer service, good training.
I was going to say a well-educated staff. You beat me to the punch. Exactly.
Yeah. It tends to extend across all of these kind of consumer touch points and so quality in the glass, quality in every kind of point where a consumer is going to come into, come in and experience that kind of brand. I absolutely agree with you there. I could keep talking about this for another hour or more, but you've got to get on with your day. I've got some things to do. I'm going to go out to Denver and judge some beer tonight for the Colorado Brewers Cup. So from layout to production flow, G&D Chillers brings real-world expertise and builds reliable systems that last. Berkeley Yeast's Dry Tropics London offers their best-selling liquid yeast strain with the ease of use of dry yeast. PacTex handles are made from 100% recycled plastic and are fully recyclable. Strata Cryo from Indie Hops makes Strata easier than ever for brewers to tap into. The Midea 50/50 Flex can convert to all fridge, all freezer, or half and half with just the touch of a button. Trust Old Orchard for the highest quality trending flavor blends at competitive prices. And Brightly software enhances your data-driven decision-making. If you've enjoyed this podcast, go to the beerandbrewing.com website, click on that subscribe button, become a subscriber to Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. And if you are out there in the beer industry, consider our Industry All Access subscription that gets you not just Craft Beer and Brewing, but also our Brewing Industry Guide magazine, both of them in print, still in print. I will add also all of our video classes, our Industry All Access weekly emails with exclusive stories from some of the best writers in beer today, and all of that. Also, if your brewery gives you the opportunity to submit beers for free for review in Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. All of those things, that's at beerandbrewing.com, and subscribe. Once again, thanks to my business partner, Hayden, or now former business partner, Hayden Strauss, for 11 years of awesome dedicated work in helping us bring you the best content, the best beer experiences, the best events, and everything else that we have been focusing on. All the best in your career in the world of tech. In the future, I'm also going to meet up with him for a beer after this, his last Friday here at Craft Beer and Brewing and Unfiltered Media. Doug, if people want to learn more about what you do with Bright Bev, with Beer Aficionado, with Beer Crunchers, where can they find you out there off in all of the digital spaces?
Sure, I am easy to track down, but you can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Beer Aficionado for some of the short form content. And then my longer blog/newsletter posts are at beercrunchers.substack.com. And then bright/bev.com is our business's website as well.
Always appreciate your perspective on what's going on in the world of beer and all of this. It's been awesome to talk with you. Cheers.
That was fun, Jamie. I appreciate you having me.
This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.